in my life. I have another story to tell you. And this is a cute alignment story. Before I worked here at Hippocrates, I actually worked in the hospital. I'm a registered nurse, and I used to work in the intensive care unit. I did that for many years. I like to refer to that time as time in the belly of the beast, where I got to see the medical approach to healing very close up. I was part of it. I was injecting people with things. And I believe that there's a lot of cleverness, a lot of brilliance. We saved people. We saved some people. We helped save some people. It was just an approach that ignored what I refer to as the invisible inner factors of healing. It ignored it. And then it also ignored just some of the basics. In the intensive care unit, we had the lights on all the time, 24 hours a day. Is that natural? When you go through your sleep cycle, do you leave the lights on? No, we're biological creatures. We need quiet and we need dark. And we shut down for hours at a time. How weird is that in itself? But anyway, I had a patient. She was a 35-year-old woman, a young woman. And they had found some kind of a mass in her abdomen. And they couldn't figure out what it was. So she was going for exploratory surgery the next day. And visiting her in the room was her twin sister. They were identical twins. And her parents. And I was fiddling with the machinery and the drugs and all that, but I overheard them talking. And they were talking about the weather. They were talking about the Atlanta Braves, because this hospital was in Atlanta, Georgia. That's a baseball team. They were talking about how, I think I really need a haircut. And then at a certain point, I went up to them and I said, visiting hours are over. You're welcome to come and be here early in the morning before she goes down for her procedure. In those days, there were visiting hours. I think nowadays, even in the ICU, they don't really have visiting hours. You can be there because they finally realized that to have loved ones in the room is good medicine. Duh. Right? How do you say duh in French? The what? Oui? Okay, if you say so. So the moment these people left the room, the woman in the bed started crying. And I went over to her and I said, what are you crying about? And she said, I have to be so strong for them. If they saw how scared I really am, they would fall apart. And she was crying. And I looked around the room to find some tissues, and there weren't any tissues. So I said, I'll be right back. I'm going to the nurse's station to get you some tissues. When I went out to the nurse's station, who was gathered around the tissue box but her family? And her sister was crying. And I went up to her and I said, what are you crying about? If my sister only knew how scared we really are, she would fall apart. So I took her by the hand, and before she could successfully wipe the tears off of her face, I dragged her back into the room. And the two sisters then saw each other crying. And of course, then I had blown their cover. And the one that I had brought in the room ran over to her sister and embraced her. And they were crying. And pretty soon the parents came into the room to find out what was going on. And they saw their two little daughters. They saw their daughters crying there, and they too ran over to the bed, and they all embraced each other, and they were crying. And it was very, very sweet. And she said out loud, she said, I am so scared. And then they all said together, pretty much together, they said, we are too. And they just cried. And at one point, while I was just there watching, and I was crying my own little tears just to witness that, at some point, the mother sort of got up off the bed out of the embrace because snot was coming out of her nose. How do you say snot in French? Okay. Snot was coming out of her nose. And she was so into the crying, she wasn't thinking about it. She went like this. She wiped the snot off on her sleeve. When her daughter looked up and saw her mother wiping snot off onto her clothes, her mother was a very, very together woman. The daughter started laughing. And then when the mother realized what she had done, she also started laughing. Meanwhile, the father and the other daughter are still down there crying. And he puts his head up like, what are you laughing about? And they were trying to explain to him what they were laughing about, but of course they were laughing so hard they couldn't explain it. But laughter like that is completely infectious. And pretty soon he was laughing. He didn't even know what he was laughing about. And the daughter just going, Mama, And then the daughter, who was the patient, started laughing with them. But then when they looked down at her, they thought, oh, our poor loved one, and they started crying again. And then they went back and forth between laughing and crying. It was the most weird, wonderful thing I've witnessed in the hospital. And then, because visiting hours were over, they left for the evening. And they embraced each other, and it was sweet kisses, and the space was so beautiful and so different. And when they left, I noticed her heart monitor. And we were monitoring all kinds of things in this woman. We had a catheter in her that monitored the pressures in the different chambers of the heart. And I pushed the little button to take pictures of it all, to keep records of it, because all of her numbers moved towards normal. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. That real deep feeling connectivity does a body good. And that night, this woman, even though her surgery was the next day, slept really well. She hadn't slept for the prior 3 nights. She slept really well. There is something about our inner world and our inner reality that when we are aligned with it, almost whatever it is, wherever we start, it does a body good. I've actually written a book called Deep Feeling, Deep Healing, The Heart, Mind, and Soul of Getting Well. And then there's this book. Would you read this, the title of this?